everything around me. Green, get the money, dollar bill, yo.
What's going on, everybody? So many of you have been asking me what I think of the video by Josh Haye titled "Why Full Loop PvP MMOs Fail," from the perspective of a Crowfall player. And Crowfall is a PvP MMO, and they wanted to know if his criticisms of these kind of games apply to Crowfall. And I watched the video, and I think his video was excellent. Honestly, I think many of the points he brings up about these games are true. I think there's definitely some design pitfalls and just things that are very difficult to navigate around when it comes to player incentives and the way people play these games. There's lots of design paradoxes for sure. So I think many of his points about the genre are incredibly valid. I think it was a great video for sure. But I think Crowfall has a little bit of an edge in this department compared to most PvP MMOs because the leads on Crowfall, the lead designers, have worked on these previous games that failed for those reasons. And you can tell by some of the decisions they've made with Crowfall that they're not falling into the exact same traps that everybody else is falling into. Do they still have some design paradoxes? Sure. There are some things that are just kind of hard to avoid. But I think Crowfall is doing it a little bit better than some of these other games have. Worse in some ways, but I think overall better. So his first criticism of PvP MMOs is that the juice just isn't worth the squeeze when it comes to investing in these kind of projects. And he's not wrong. When it comes to making a profit, MMOs are not the ticket. It's really hard to compete with mobile games. As an investor, as somebody personally that's invested in video game companies before, it's really crazy. Like, investing in AAA games in general just seems like a real waste of time when you can just throw a bunch of money at 20 random mobile games, and if one of them hits, then you're fucking gravy, baby. I hate that that's the way it is. I genuinely do, as somebody that loves video games and hates these predatory mobile games. It's just the way it is right now. There's the mobile gaming market is very new. There's a lot of new mobile gamers out there relative to the rest of the video game market. And quite frankly, they just don't realize they're playing garbage. I'm hoping that over time, these mobile gamers will mature and these games will get better and people will quit playing these fucking dog shit games. But it's just not happening yet. And right now, all the money's in mobile. And it's annoying because there are a lot of legitimately talented artists and game developers and programmers working on these mobile games that are fucking garbage, but that's where the money's at, and they got to pay their bills, right? So I don't like it, but it's true. This is an absolutely valid criticism. And when you're making a niche, when you're making an MMO, which is a niche, and then you're making a PvP MMO, which is a niche within a niche, the money is certainly not there immediately. So we'll see. Right now, mobile games and battle royales are where the gold rush is at. That's where you're seeing all of the investment hype, and that's where the gold rush is currently happening. But the thing with gold rushes is that eventually they end. Eventually, all the speculation will die down, and the momentum, we'll get back to reality here soon enough. It might take a couple years, but I do think that this trend will eventually die down, or at least stabilize. And anybody that's making a niche game is kind of banking on the fact that if we make a good game, people will come. And I think ultimately, if you do that, that will happen. And I think you can attract a new audience that maybe you weren't even expecting. And this is something that I've noticed from younger gamers in particular that seem to be very tolerant towards these more hardcore games. A lot of young gamers really are enjoying, Rust and Tarkov and hardcore Minecraft and these games that, hardcore Minecraft in particular. Like Minecraft, you don't really get into it for hardcore PvP, but there are a lot of kids that really love these crazy hardcore Minecraft servers. So I think that gaming trends do change over the years, and these games take a while to make. So you're almost banking on what do you think the future holds, not what do you think the present holds. So we'll see. We'll see if this trend continues. Maybe in the future we'll start seeing MMOs in general come on the rebound again, and FPS decline. I mean, who knows, right? You don't really know what the trends are. For the longest time, we were all talking about StarCraft 2 and how that was the greatest game ever. Remember that? That wasn't that long ago. One thing to consider with many of these niche games is that they just don't need the same player base as these big AAA games do. Pay attention to where these game studios are located, how much marketing the game has. Is this game making $1 million cinematics? All this stuff matters because many of these niche video games, they have pretty small teams. They have pretty low overhead, so they just don't need the same amount of players and money coming in. That's something that you really need to consider. When you take a look at something like New World, that game has a huge marketing budget, a huge team, an engine that is much more expensive to work in. The assets are much more expensive to create. There's a lot more overhead with a game like that, so it needs to make more money, which is why they obviously scaled back the hardcore PvP aspect because, quite frankly, they need to have a critical mass of players or it's just not going to work at all. So that's something you have to consider. Many of these niche games are niche, and they know they're niche, and they've kind of set themselves up to be that way. That's why they're not in, Irvine, California, or in San Diego, or San Francisco, or, any of these other places where it costs $1 million to live in a box. After the financials, he goes on to talk about how many of these hardcore games suffer from players just quitting after they face a loss. And this is something that I think Crowfall does very well. Crowfall is a game where you can kill people and take their stuff, but the losses don't feel devastating. And part of that is because the game is actually not full loot. The game, at its most hardcore, only has inventory loot. So your equipped items are safe. They do take a durability hit, but anything that you were gathering, and again, this is the most hardcore worlds, the factions servers, it's only half of your loot. So you only lose the stuff in your inventory. And what that ends up being in practice, at absolute worst, you're looking at maybe 15 to 20 minutes of farming. That's about what people do before they bank. Crowfall, you just don't face devastating losses. In Crowfall, when you die, you are more mad that you died and the person you died to. You're more mad about the person that killed you and how you died versus the stuff you lost, generally. Now, sometimes you get caught with your pants down. It happens, and you're like, damn, I should have banked, or I got greedy, or whatever it was. But it's not some like, oh man, I just lost my really awesome sword I farmed for, or oh man, I just, all that time and effort down the drain. Like, it's generally not like that. At worst, you're probably looking at 15 to 20 minutes of basically free labor that you gave to somebody else. That's really the worst it gets in Crowfall. So I think they've done a great job with Crowfall in particular at making death stings, and it's exciting when you kill somebody and they have stuff, but it's not devastating. It's a little bee sting that you go, man, that sucks, but it's not this crushing defeat. Now, the only time in Crowfall that you're going to face a serious loss is if your guild has its keep ransacked and destroyed. That's about the only time that the game's going to really be punishing, and that's felt at the guild level. That's not at individual level. So as an individual, you're not going to die and be like, man, I lost all my stuff, I'm done. That's not what happens in this game. There have been guilds that have had their keeps ransacked, and to be honest, the player behavior that appears to happen, it's almost a sense of relief, because once you don't have to worry about maintaining your keep and defending it, and now you are just a group of homeless barbarians that don't give a fuck about anything, it's almost more fun. As somebody that's played a campaign where you've had to worry about your keep and people attacking and being ready for that and building it up, it's kind of fun when you don't have to do that too. So I don't know. I think the way they've got it set up in Crowfall is pretty good. His next point about PvP MMOs is something that Crowfall actually has solved pretty well, and that is that one force becomes an unassailable tyrant that cannot be stopped. That somebody gets so powerful that they just continually get more and more powerful, and nothing can be done to stop them. And Crowfall, since its inception, has set out to solve this problem with the campaigns. Crowfall is structured in a way to where a campaign will start, it's a fresh start for everybody, and then that campaign will end, and everything that happened in that campaign, all the keeps, all the holdings, all the score is wiped. Then you take your characters, bring them into a new campaign. What this means is that at the start of every campaign, it's a 0-0 score, and anybody can win. Now, the best guilds, there's definitely a tier list of guilds. There's the A tier guilds that, have a very good chance of winning, the B tier, C tier, and whatnot. Now, what ends up happening here is that staying on top all the time is very difficult. Throughout modern Crowfall history, the top guilds, the guys that have been winning the campaign, it's kind of been a circulating list because staying on top is a lot of work. And what normally ends up happening is that the guild that wins generally says, all right, we're going to take it easy for a little bit and cool our jets and let everybody chill out for a second. And that allows people that didn't win the previous time, or some of the smaller guys, to surge up and have their chance at winning, because in a game like Crowfall, there's a lot of organization, a lot of stuff that needs to be done, and generally after you get a win, it feels good to just take a break. So the way they've got the game set up, some of these unassailable tyrants all of a sudden become very vulnerable when everything gets reset and it's anybody's ball game and somebody's really hungry for that win. So I do think the campaign system is something that Crowfall has that really, really changes the game with, some of these problems that these hardcore PvP MMOs have. When you have a reset mechanic and you have that, all of a sudden, there's now a big incentive to jump in and play, because those guys that had all those keeps and had that, chokehold around you, they just don't anymore because campaign's over. We got a new one. It's really cool. And his final point is basically that these games have player bases that kind of cannibalize themselves, where it ends up being a situation where people play these games to make other people quit playing the game. And there's absolutely an element to that in Crowfall. But the thing is that that's much harder to execute on in Crowfall due to the resetting nature of the game and the fact that there's multiple campaigns, there's a faction campaign. I don't really think anybody's been bullied out of Crowfall. People have absolutely quit the game, but I don't necessarily think that they quit because somebody just kept kicking their sandcastle over, or somebody just, kept taking all their stuff to where they just quit the game because of that. The game has issues, sure, but I think that from a social perspective, they may have just made it kind of difficult for people to get others to quit over that particular reason. Now, I do think it is very hard to have a mid-sized guild in Crowfall have an impact in Dregs. I think this is something they're going to address with time to give these mid-sized guilds more of a feeling that they can do something and actually hold a piece of land. Right now, it is a little zergy in the big fights, and it's very hard to hold anything at all if you're not a huge guild. But I think this is something they're working on. I think that there are some solutions. I think that they could definitely do some degree of instancing and leave the world, for the most part, still wild, wild west, open world PvP. Anything could happen. I think they could utilize a little bit of instancing here and there. I know Albion did that to a great degree. I'd love to see some Hellgate kind of things in Crowfall. But ultimately, I'm pretty optimistic for Crowfall. In that I think they're not making the exact same mistakes that many of these other hardcore PvP MMOs are making. And I think, honestly, the main one they're making is that the game isn't that hardcore. It really isn't. Like, yes, you can lose your items, but it's not... Like, I think they really did hit that perfect balance of, killing somebody feels sweet, but death doesn't sting too bad. I think they did a pretty good job with that. And I think ultimately that comes down to the fact that many of these developers have worked on these games and have made those mistakes already, so they're not going to make the exact same ones with Crowfall. With that being said, I'm curious what the other Crowfall players think of this video, and if you think Crowfall is subject to some of the problems listed in this video. So let me know what you think in the comments down below, and I'll see you next time. Have a good one.